Jordan left the care of our beloved cat, Lucy, to me while I was suffering from morning sickness. After a safe delivery, I was enjoying happy days, but then living together with my in-laws was proposed. Considering the limited time left with my mother-in-law, I agreed to live together, but the daily stress gradually built up. This life with my in-laws slowly started to drive me insane. My name is Rebecca Perez. I met Jordan when I was handling my first major project as a young designer. His company commissioned me to design a new business logo, and we had several meetings about it. The conference room at the large corporation was so refined and spacious that it took my breath away. I was impressed by the clear explanations given by the employees describing the business details. During breaks, their high communication skills and the warm atmosphere were quite evident. In such an environment, I was desperately taking notes while receiving information from a senior, trying to grasp the main points of the work. After the long meeting, I was so relieved that I couldn't help but sigh. Quite a lot of tension for the first day, don't you think? We need to relax more and enjoy the process. My progress was thanks to Senior Nikki choosing me as her assistant. I aim to use this opportunity to design a corporate logo by myself. After the meeting, I didn't go straight home but went to a nearby pub with Nikki. It had been a while since Nikki and I could align our schedules for a meal together. "You're working hard, and at this rate you might find a new boyfriend," Nikki said in a relaxed mode, deepening the conversation about my love life. "Not at all. I haven't had any good encounters," I replied, enjoying a beer after work. Nikki's interest in my love life stems from my history of failed relationships. She is the only person who knows about my past partners, and our relationship is very close. She wishes me happiness but seems to enjoy the episodes of my failed relationships. In the past, I had a boyfriend during high school who reported everything to his mother. He went to another school, so I used to only go on dates with him a few times a month. I have also witnessed him frequently exchanging messages during our dates. When I asked him, "Who are you messaging?" he replied, "I'm telling my mom what we're eating right now." I felt a bit uncomfortable with the situation and thought to myself, it would be troublesome if our dinner turned out to be the same. His comments continued. "My mom chose my outfit today. I've seen this movie with my mom, and I promised to eat this chocolate sundae with my mom." It was always about his mom. I was shocked to discover later on that his phone's wallpaper was a picture of his mom. I realized it was impossible for me to surpass his mom, and I ended our relationship. The guy I dated in college used my part-time job earnings at the casino and was dishonest. The person I dated right after getting a job turned out to be married, unexpectedly. I cut off the relationship immediately, but I still feel terrified at the thought of him possibly demanding alimony. Every time I hear it, it's good for a laugh. Nikki laughed, always looking forward to these stories. I've told this story many times, but thanks to Nikki laughing at it, I've come to accept it as a good memory. Just as we were about to move to the next bar, Nikki's phone rang. Her husband was feeling unwell and asked her to come home immediately. It's a pity. I thought we could drink leisurely since tomorrow is a day off. But there's nothing to be done if he's unwell, so go home and take care of him. Although I was quite drunk, I couldn't stop Nikki. She apologized, left money for the drinks on the table, and hurried home. Watching her rush home, I thought, it must be nice to go back to a home where your family is waiting, and I began to feel like getting married. I didn't feel like drinking alone that night, so I decided to go home too. While waiting on the train platform, someone spoke to me from behind. "Good work today," the voice said, and I immediately started thinking about work. There stood a tall man with black hair and glasses. "Good evening, I replied, not recognizing who he was. He continued the conversation. "Thank you for today's meeting. My name is Jordan Perez." At that moment, I remembered that there was someone else with the same last name. I was so focused on the meeting that I hadn't really looked at his face properly. "I apologize. Thank you for today," I said to him, expressing my gratitude, and then fell silent. Thanks to Jordan sharing many interesting stories, waiting for the train felt enjoyable. Jordan is 5 years older than me and lives alone. He doesn't have a girlfriend but showers his cat with a lot of love. I also love cats, and we had a lively conversation about that topic. When the train arrived, we said our goodbyes, and I felt a desire to continue our conversation. That night, as I lay in bed, I hoped to talk to Jordan again. After several work meetings, Jordan and I completed the logo design deal without having time for personal conversations. However, a few days later, I received an email from Jordan through the company mail, surprisingly including his personal number. Despite my hesitation, I couldn't suppress my strong desire to get closer to him, and as soon as I got home, I called him. "I apologize for calling you all of a sudden. I really enjoyed our conversation," I told him. Jordan explained that he had tried to give me his contact information several times before but couldn't find the right moment, and finally mustered the courage to contact me from the address written on my business card. Later, Jordan invited me on a date to a cat cafe, to which I happily agreed. On the day of the date, I was mesmerized by Jordan's casual attire. He was dressed in branded clothes from head to toe, but he wore them in a way that didn't feel off-putting. "Thanks for coming today," he said with a smile, and I realized that I was falling in love with Jordan, feeling my heart race. He had wanted to go to a cat cafe for a long time, but felt awkward going alone. We had a fun time surrounded by adorable cats. On the way home that day, Jordan proposed that we start dating with marriage in mind. I was surprised, but driven by my strong feelings for him and a longing for a relationship, I immediately agreed. He hugged me, filled with joy. I thought getting married wouldn't be bad if our feelings matched, although I hadn't been focusing on marriage-minded dating. As we went on more dates, my feelings for Jordan deepened. My personal fulfillment positively impacted my work, leading to an increase in design responsibilities. I quickly reported my new relationship to Nikki, and she supported me enthusiastically. 6 months after we started dating, Jordan and I officially got married. He was serious about marriage, which brought stability and smoothness to my life. Following his lead, we ultimately decided to tie the knot. After registering our marriage, Jordan, I, and his beloved cat, Lucy, started our life together. The initial period of our marriage was particularly trouble-free, and I felt happy. As time passed and I turned 27, I became pregnant and suffered from severe morning sickness. The stress of commuting increased, so I switched to working from home. This was possible thanks to the supportive environment at my workplace. However, the smell of Lucy's litter became a problem. Before my pregnancy, the cat's litter box odor hadn't bothered me, but it exacerbated my morning sickness. I tried wearing a mask and cleaning it frequently, but these actions only made me feel worse. Eventually, the smell of the cat itself became unbearable, and I could no longer hold her. One night, after returning from a drinking party, Jordan yelled in anger, "What's going on? Lucy's litter box is so dirty." That day, I had been feeling particularly unwell and had been bedridden all day. Despite having informed him of my condition, He had prioritized going out with friends. Therefore, I couldn't understand his anger. "I'm sorry, but I told you I wasn't feeling well, right?" I replied, apologizing yet feeling unjustified. Jordan's anger became more apparent. "What are you talking about? Your condition and not taking care of Lucy are unrelated." While he scolded me, he gently embraced Lucy. I indeed used my poor health as an excuse to not have to clean Lucy's litter box, but I had previously mentioned that her smell was becoming unbearable for me. Despite this, Jordan once again asked me to clean it. Since I was at home, I accepted the request. However, is that really a task I should be doing while feeling unwell? Normally, I wouldn't clean it all day while I was away at work, so this shouldn't be an issue. Thinking about it, I felt a surge of anger at why I should be blamed. I'm protecting our baby right now. I'm feeling sick from morning sickness, so I can't take care of Lucy. You know the smell of Lucy is tough for me, right? If cleaning is needed, why don't you have her stay at your parents' home until my morning sickness subsides? I blurted that out. By the time I realized it, it was too late. Jordan took Lucy and left with a terrifying expression. I immediately tried to apologize, but he responded, "I can't be with someone who doesn't love Lucy. I'll return when I've calmed down." So I've been just waiting for his return. However, weeks passed and Jordan never came back home. But one day, Jordan suddenly returned home alone. It seems that his parents had been taking care of Lucy. After hearing his mother's words, "How long do you intend to stay here?" Jordan showed remorse, apologized to me, and I admitted that I had gone too far, and we reconciled. This was our first major fight as a couple. Afterward, I safely gave birth to our daughter, Charlotte. Months later, Lucy came back home too, and by that time, I no longer noticed the smell. Parenting makes time fly, and Charlotte has already become a fashionable 5-year-old girl. I returned to work from home and was struggling with balancing work and parenting, but I was living a satisfying life. Since resolving the issue with Lucy, Jordan and I haven't had any major fights and have been living cooperatively. Then, suddenly, an event occurred. My mother-in-law fell seriously ill and, with only a short time left, wished to live with us. I have had little to no relationship with my in-laws, only seeing them during the New Year celebrations, so the proposal to live together left me perplexed. Since Charlotte was born, visits from my in-laws have been sparse, and our relationship has been quite thin. However, for me, that level of distance was appropriate. Therefore, I proposed moving to an apartment near my in-laws' home. Since daily meal preparations are needed, bringing them over is tedious, and a large house has plenty of rooms, so it would expand our living space. Jordan argues that living together is economically advantageous since he would pay the rent and utilities. We, as a couple, are financially independent, with him taking care of the rent and utility bills. We save a fixed amount each month, and the rest is managed freely by each of us. Therefore, cost is not an issue for me. Despite feeling that living with others is difficult, it seems he does not understand my feelings. Charlotte is happy with the spacious house. I agreed to live with my in-laws on the condition that we would end the arrangement when my mother-in-law either recovers or passes away. Thus, we moved to my in-laws' house when our daughter started elementary school. My mother-in-law's illness was severe, and she couldn't stand for long periods, but she was able to manage her bathroom and bathing needs independently, so the need for care was less than expected. My duties remained the same as before, only with increased laundry and cooking, which I did not find difficult. My mother-in-law checks Charlotte's homework when she returns home and seems too well to pass away soon. The problems were with my father-in-law and Jordan. My father-in-law would casually give commands, expecting me to understand and act immediately, which of course was not always possible. Witnessing this, Jordan began to take advantage of me more and more. Situations such as the following started to occur. Considering my mother-in-law's health, I always made lightly seasoned meals. However, my father-in-law seemed dissatisfied with the seasoning. At mealtimes, he would point at the mean and demand salt or pepper. After complying a few times, I could no longer bear it and started leaving condiments on the table from the beginning, urging him to help himself. My father-in-law was satisfied with this arrangement, but Jordan kept requesting, "Make our food more flavorful." I ignored his request. Why should I have to do that? I strongly felt that he should handle it himself. Jordan, possibly because his parents were nearby, acted like a child who hasn't fully grown up. It was unreasonable that he prioritized caring for Lucy over our daughter, Charlotte. When he came home, he paid no attention to Charlotte's homework and was only busy with Lucy. When we went shopping, he would only pick out the brands he wanted or toys for Lucy. While my in-laws still saw Jordan as a child, his childish behavior was gradually diminishing my love for him. What I found most distressing was when my father-in-law interfered with Charlotte's actions. Charlotte, a grade schooler who had started showing interest in makeup, had been buying child-friendly cosmetics. On holidays, she would enjoy applying makeup and doing her nails by herself. Seeing this, my father-in-law would joke, "Is she trying to become a stripper by flaunting her looks at that age?" While he only gave me brief instructions, his constant complaints and sarcasm were particularly infuriating. However, Charlotte retorted, "Grandpa is old-fashioned," which silenced him, and that made me feel relieved. The most uncomfortable moment was when the topic of having a second child came up. "You should consider your age and think about having a second child soon. Shall I give you some advice?" he said, which I found very unpleasant. I am already in my mid-30s and Jordan is approaching 40. We did want a second child, but it was merely a matter of timing. We were satisfied with just Charlotte and did not intend to pursue having another child through fertility treatments. This was a decision for us as a couple and is not something for others to intervene, and the way it was said was extremely displeasing. I had been enduring patiently until my mother-in-law passed away. She herself had apologized several times, saying, "I'm sorry for the trouble caused by my husband and son." She had never opposed her husband in the past and had been unable to speak up. She asked me to be more tolerant of Jordan's behavior since he was spending less time with her. Jordan's behavior was said to be confined to his time at his parents' home, so I couldn't argue against it. Moreover, concerning the matter of having children, my mother-in-law confided in me with a smile. "I've decided I don't want another child with him." Despite the pressure from my father-in-law and Jordan, my bond with my mother-in-law deepened. While I yearned to leave the house, the approaching farewell to my mother-in-law pained my heart. As the first year of living together was about to conclude, my mother-in-law's condition worsened and she was hospitalized. I continued visiting the hospital, preparing for the inevitable farewell. A month later, she passed away quietly in the hospital, surrounded by family. After the funeral, as we returned to our daily routines, sadness lingered. Although I had planned to leave the house immediately after her death, I continued living there to avoid changing Charlotte's school mid-year. Even a month after my mother-in-law's death, my father-in-law persisted in his authoritarian behavior, and Jordan's attitude had further deteriorated. Even then, he showed no signs of preparing to move out. Instead, He argued that we should stay here forever, claiming it would be pitiful to leave his father alone. I was hoping to move when Charlotte reached 3rd grade, but no effort was being made to find a new home. Furthermore, Jordan began to make unilateral statements about the commute being too long and possibly changing jobs. For me, my father-in-law's circumstances weren't crucial, and with my mother-in-law gone, there was no reason for us to stay in this house. This issue further escalated tensions between us. One night, after Charlotte had gone to bed, my father-in-law and Jordan were drinking and looking through keepsakes. They were quite drunk, reminiscing about my mother-in-law when suddenly a will was discovered. The will mentioned that there was hardly any estate to leave behind, stating it would be sufficient to sell the keepsakes. Most of the content was words of gratitude towards me. Though they did not show me the will, my father-in-law began to complain about its contents. It's meaningless when someone who couldn't even save money passes away. I was hoping to enjoy the inheritance, he grumbled. She should have included more words of gratitude towards me. My father-in-law said loudly, his voice amplified by the alcohol. Hearing Jordan express his disappointment with, "If there's no money, then there's no point in living together," I was shocked. Was the reason for living together just to target your mother's estate? I asked in a chilly voice, astonished that the discussions about money were not out of concern for his mother as I had thought. Yes, the only benefit of living together was the financial aspect. We lived here without paying rent, being able to freely spend money. We intended to continue this lifestyle, my father-in-law said with a laugh. Unable to contain my anger, I felt my grip tighten. But as the will states, my father-in-law pointed to the will. The will mentioned, "Despite being busy, you took care of me." Busy? You've just been sitting at home doing nothing. A NEET who doesn't pay anything is just a burden in terms of food costs. Get out of this house, he criticized. I had been working from home for a long time, and I had explained this to my father-in-law repeatedly, but he never understood. Let me say this again, I have been working, and I've been preparing all the meals. Do you really think such accusations are valid? I retorted calmly. While trying to keep my emotions in check, I calmly made my counter-arguments. Provoked by my father-in-law, Jordan also began to hurl accusations at me. Housework isn't that hard, right? You're home all the time. It must be easy for you. We're out there working hard every day. You're just freeloading at my parents' house, he said. Despite his drunken state, Jordan's words were rude beyond comprehension. He deemed the household chores insignificant, yet since moving back home, he hadn't lifted a finger. Without responding, I just retreated to my room. They continued laughing, showing their contempt for me. I resolved to show them exactly what their future would look like without me. The next morning, while the two were still asleep, I took Charlotte and left the house. That night, Jordan called. I could guess what he had seen, but it took him quite a while to notice. "What is this?" he sounded flustered. Unable to contain it any longer, I almost burst out laughing at his words. "What do you mean? Are you calling because you can't understand the bank book? If so, you should ask your father directly," I replied coldly. Before she went to the hospital, my mother-in-law had given me the bank books, entrusted me with managing the household finances, and left behind information on debts that my father-in-law and Jordan had, along with a divorce application. Unbeknownst to many, she had been gradually depleting her savings to cover living expenses, as my father-in-law had accumulated a significant amount of debt, causing us to spend over $5,000 a month on living costs. By the time of her passing, There was hardly any estate left because the savings had already run out. Not wanting to cause any unnecessary worry, I took over the cost of living expenses without informing them. "Why do you have so much money?" I didn't answer his question but continued. "By the way, Jordan, you also had debts." Among the documents my mother-in-law had given me was a promissory note with Jordan's name on it. Although I was surprised, I had somewhat expected this. My mother-in-law had said, "Thank you for enduring patiently for so long. After I'm gone, I want you to live freely, released from the binds of your husband and Jordan. I trusted you, Jordan. I wish you had been honest with me about the debts," I said emotionally. "I'm sorry," he apologized lightly. His casual apology seemed to presume forgiveness, and I pressed him further. "Is there nothing else you need to say?" I was looking for something more than just an apology. After a moment of silence, he finally began to speak. "I've been unfaithful. I'm sorry," Jordan suddenly confessed. He admitted to having inappropriate relationships with multiple people, including a junior at work and business partners. The costs of maintaining multiple relationships had led to his debt, he explained. "Thank you for speaking the truth more easily than expected. Now I have all the evidence I need," I said, and Jordan was left speechless. Having suspected Jordan's infidelity but lacking concrete evidence, I had set a trap to test him by secretly recording his statements as proof. "You thought I didn't know about the affairs? The divorce is already a foregone conclusion, so please prepare the paperwork quickly. I'll be taking a fair share of the assets," I declared firmly. Jordan was panicking on the phone, but I calmly ended the call. Afterward, through a lawyer, I ensured I received a fair share of the property division, and the divorce was officially finalized. Jordan ended up accumulating even more debt due to the payments required for the property settlement. I obtained sole custody of our daughter Charlotte and completely severed ties with Jordan, choosing not to receive child support from him. Thanks to Jordan confessing details about his infidelity, I even received apologies from his affair partners. A severe conflict erupted between Jordan and his father over financial issues, eventually leading to Jordan being disowned and ousted from the family home. This conflict between the two escalated significantly, to the point where local residents had to call the police due to the disturbance. This series of events facilitated the smooth progression of our divorce proceedings, providing me with some relief. Financially distressed, my father-in-law found it difficult to make ends meet on his pension alone and was forced to look for work to manage his debt repayments. Having always depended on my mother-in-law, he struggled with basic household tasks, realizing just how significant her presence had been. Jordan's own issues were severe. His affair became known at his workplace, resulting in him losing his job. His consideration of changing jobs was likely influenced by this scandal. Previously enjoying a relatively affluent lifestyle at home, Jordan had escalated his affair behaviors, fueled by his preference for expensive brands. Furthermore, one of Jordan's affair partners got engaged to a wealthy man right after breaking up with him. However, once her fiancé learned about her past with Jordan, he called off the engagement and demanded a division of assets, drastically altering her life due to her association with Jordan. Currently, Jordan is unemployed, saddled with significant debt, yet still caring for his beloved cat, Lucy, day by day. His life has temporarily lost its stability, facing many challenges. Treating pets with care is undoubtedly important, but when a cat is considered a priority over me, I begin to question my own worth and find myself caught in complex emotions. Continuing life with my husband might have led to a completely different future, But that choice was not feasible for me. So, with the property division from our divorce as my starting capital, I decided to establish my independence as a designer. After leaving the company I previously worked for, I started a new career at a design studio run by Nikki, the founder. I communicated this significant change to Jordan, but he seemed not to take my words seriously. Since starting work at Nikki's studio, my skills have been recognized, and new job offers have been coming in steadily. This has significantly increased my salary, allowing me to lead an independent life. I am working to further increase my income and aim for an even more stable financial life. If my daughter Charlotte wishes to see Jordan, I am prepared to facilitate that, but currently she is engrossed in fashion and seems to pay little attention to her father's presence. Charlotte lives her life in her own style, unconcerned about others' opinions, and her attitude gives me a lot of courage. As my mother-in-law once told me, I have truly gained my freedom. The past failures with Jordan are now just a laughing matter, which I have overcome with Nikki's support. I intend to continue loving design and living happily with my precious daughter Charlotte. I once imagined marriage to be more enjoyable. As I was immersed in my work, I suddenly found myself at the age of 43. Thinking about my old age, I shuddered at the fear of spending it alone. During such times, I met him, who was 2 years older than me. He was quiet, always a comforting presence, and gradually my heart was drawn to him. Half a year after we started dating, we got married and moved into a house to start our new life. We respected each other and lived by the rule that we could consult each other about any issues. Thanks to that, our marital relationship was very good, and I felt we were like a picture-perfect couple. Though we were getting older, our married life was going smoothly. However, suddenly dark clouds loomed over our marriage. One day, suddenly my parents-in-law decided to divorce because the children have become independent. According to my husband, his parents' marriage had not been going well for a while, and there was hardly any communication between them. Since my husband and his sister had grown up, I wondered, why now, but avoided delving too deep. As we were in our mid-40s, we thought, they must have various issues, but their divorce should not concern us. However, that fact heavily involved us. Since the greeting to my in-laws just before getting married, the relationship with my mother-in-law had significantly deteriorated. It was not clear what she disliked, but she was dissatisfied with everything I did. For example, she would say, "The seasoning of the food is sloppy," or "I don't like the cleaning schedule." If it had only been about household matters, it might have been bearable, but it went further to, "Your dressing is unfashionable," and even to criticizing my appearance. Eventually, it seemed like she was about to say, "I don't like your very existence." Naturally, I ignored it and tried to have as little interaction as possible. My husband agreed that it was the best approach. However, I was worried that my mother-in-law's anger might escalate and her attacks on me might worsen after the divorce, but I didn't think much of it since we kept our distance. In addition, there was another concern about my sister-in-law. She lived with my parents-in-law too. She didn't have a regular job and spent her time hanging out, and even in her 40s, she was still unmarried. I wasn't in a position to say anything about this, but She usually stayed home and occasionally did part-time jobs when she needed money. Because of this lifestyle, she hardly had any money, and every time she met me or my husband, she would beg for pocket money. I think it's problematic for someone in their 40s to ask for pocket money, but as family, we couldn't completely ignore her, and my husband continued to support her with small amounts. It was truly painful for my husband to provide financial support to his sister. However, since the amounts she asked for were just enough to buy books or a new game, my husband and I ended up giving in rather than resisting. When my husband learned that she was also asking me for money, he said, "If she says anything to you next time, let me know to protect me." However, my sister-in-law approached me when I was alone. So I couldn't ignore her and was always unable to escape. Eventually, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, whenever I visited my in-laws' house, acted as if saying, "The money tree has come," which was very unpleasant. From this background, we started to distance ourselves from my in-laws' home. I feared that the situation at my parents-in-law's house might change drastically after their divorce and kept wishing, "Please don't let us get involved." However, my wish was in vain, and an unexpected event occurred. A few days after their divorce was decided, the doorbell rang early in the morning. We were still asleep. Because it was 5 in the morning. Who could it be at this early hour, I wondered, half asleep, as I opened the door, and there stood my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They were holding large bags and grinning. I immediately regretted opening the door. And surprised, I asked, "What do you need at this early hour?" My mother-in-law ignored my words and said, "You're late. Let us in quickly." I hurriedly asked, "What's with those bags? Where are you going?" However, the conversation did not go through, and I was told, "What do you mean? Where are we going? We just came here." I might not have been fully awake yet, but I was perplexed by the two of them, who seemed to have fled from somewhere with their bags, pushing past me to enter the house. Unable to comprehend, I asked in confusion, "What? What is happening?" as I tried to stop them. At that moment, my mother-in-law, looking down on me as if I were an incompetent daughter-in-law, declared, "You should understand the situation, right? We are going to live here from now on." "Here? Live here? What are you talking about?" I have not heard anything about this from my husband. My husband would have consulted with me beforehand. I had just woken up, and with my morning low blood pressure, my mind was not fully functioning yet. For the first 30 minutes after waking up, both my body and mind are slow. Despite that state, I argued, "What situation are you talking about?" "The divorce." "But what do you mean by living here? I have not heard anything about it." However, as if it were natural, they pushed past me, brought in their bags, and started using the storeroom we had been using. Feeling my head clearing, I pleaded, "Please wait. This sudden development is troubling." Then, my mother-in-law glared coldly and said, "Our family is in trouble. Don't you have a heart or feelings? That's why you are a bad daughter-in-law," and she scoffed at me again. At that moment, the situation changed. My husband, who is not a morning person, rushed over, surprised at the presence of the visitors. "Why are you two here so early? And what are those bags?" he asked. My mother-in-law explained to my husband what she had told me. Feeling that it was appropriate for my husband to handle this situation, I quietly left the scene. Ignoring my husband's attempts to stop them, they began to spread out their belongings as if it were their own home. Although my husband tried patiently to talk to them, he eventually agreed to let them stay temporarily. This must have been a major concession for him. I wanted to throw them out, but they are his family. My husband understood my feelings and set a condition that they could stay for up to 1 month until the situation improved. Even though it was temporary, they were allowed to stay in the house and seemed to enjoy their days. We were forced to clean out the room that had been used as a storeroom for them. Furthermore, I had to prepare their meals 3 times a day at fixed times, like in a school. Moreover, they did not help at all, acting as if they were guests. If the preparation was even slightly delayed, my mother-in-law would sarcastically say, "Isn't it ready yet? I'm already hungry. Does this house enjoy keeping its family hungry on purpose?" I quietly retorted in my mind, "How can you be so hungry without doing anything?" However, continuing the conversation would only bring more sarcasm, so I chose to remain silent. At first, I cooked the meals, but gradually I began to question my actions and stopped. They hardly did anything besides eating, just lying in the living room and watching TV all day. They would order me around like prepare the bath and meals, and then would make sarcastic remarks to me, demanding bring coffee, serve snacks, vacuum the floor. After only a week of living together, I was mentally exhausted. Furthermore, my sister-in-law naturally said, "Please give me some pocket money," and reached out her hand. Surprised, I asked, "What do you need it for?" She responded childishly with dissatisfaction, "Why do I have to report to you?" It is hard to understand why I should give pocket money to a freeloader who does not help with the household chores. If I lectured her on the spot, it was clear that my sister-in-law would immediately report to my mother-in-law, and the mistreatment would become even harsher. Therefore, I kept my refusal minimal, saying, "You are not my child." In response, my sister-in-law angrily retorted, "You're letting your sister struggle." In this house, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law did not provide any financial support at all, and the cost of the meals they consumed was expected to be paid by us, as if it were natural. As a result, far more expenses were incurred than usual. Moreover, they kept asking for more pocket money. Nevertheless, how can they be so brazen? I had no choice but to continue this stressful cohabitation, enduring their unreasonable demands and sarcasm. Every time my husband came home, he would comfort me and sternly warn them, but their calm behavior was only temporary, and they fundamentally did not change. While my husband was at work during the day, they acted as if anything was permitted. Even after the promised 1-month period ended, the two of them showed no signs of leaving the house. Looking back, it was clear they had been planning to exploit my kind husband and use various excuses to continue staying. Gradually, their attitudes became more arrogant, and my sister-in-law started calling me in a childish manner, "Wife," but I had already decided to ignore them. Just hearing their voices was mentally exhausting, and I could no longer bear being imposed with various demands. This life is impossible. I'm at my limit. I must do something. I really might go mad if I don't change the situation I kept telling myself every day. Around that time, just before my sister-in-law and mother-in-law arrived, my husband had achieved a great success at work and had just been promoted. While it was a happy development, my husband had been scheduled for a week-long business trip. However, he was hesitant about leaving, saying, "I can't leave you alone in such a situation." He said he should go on the business trip after the issue with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had settled, but I was also worried about casting a shadow over his career due to personal circumstances. Therefore, I decided to send him off with a smile to ease his worries a bit. "It's okay, it's only a week, and in the worst case, I'll escape to a hotel," I told him. My husband was still hesitant to decide, but I forcefully sent him off. I prepared myself to confront the two of them. As soon as they knew my husband was away on a business trip, they began to escalate their selfishness, acting like immature adults. Honestly, even young children might be more understanding. When the two of them called out to me while I was busy with housework, I tried saying, "Please handle it yourselves." Then, the complaints and grievances became unstoppable. My mother-in-law turned to me and said, "You're my son's wife, yet why can't you do even the basic things? In my time, arguing wasn't allowed. Your thinking is too naive." While complaining, the two of them seemed to be enjoying it. Seeing my troubled state seemed to amuse them, as if they were mocking me. I thought I must somehow control them, but how? While thinking about it, I began to devise a plan to silence them. 3 days after my husband's business trip, my mother-in-law again threw sarcasm at me. "Can't you even do what I told you yesterday? Are you really incapable of anything?" Finally, as I remained silent, my mother-in-law pressed on with an insulting tone. "You always seem dissatisfied. But what are you thinking? If you have something to say, say it clearly." I thought this was the opportunity to speak up. If I missed this moment, I might never get another chance to speak up. Since they were urging me to talk honestly, I decided to let out all my pent-up emotions. "Mother, it's clear you find pleasure in tormenting me, right? However, I am not merely a housemaid. At least maintain basic adult manners," I responded calmly yet firmly. As expected, my mother-in-law retorted, What basic manners?" They seem not to understand how unreasonable their actions are. So I explained in a way they would understand. "You get angry if your demands are not prioritized over my busy schedule, right? This is generally called selfishness also. Demanding money without working is considered mooching. How can people who can't even follow these basic principles be considered decent? Since you are adults, please act more independently. Sister, you are already in your 40s. How old are you, mother? Or are you regressing into a child? Should I take you to a hospital?" What I said seemed unexpectedly blunt to them. They probably did not anticipate such a frank confrontation. Looking at me, they were taken aback for a moment, their faces turning red as they comprehended what had been said. "Don't speak with that tone. I won't allow a daughter-in-law like you to speak so impudently," she shouted. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law criticized me more fiercely than ever, and ultimately, my sister-in-law exclaimed, "If you can't serve us, you're just a nuisance." Then, my mother-in-law told me, "It's unthinkable for a daughter-in-law not to serve her family. "Get out of this house." I was shocked by the phrase, "get out." This house belongs to my husband and me. It was astonishing that they, who were forcefully freeloading at our house, would tell me to leave. But I could not afford to lose to them in this situation. I could not give in. Desperately, I thought of my next move. Then it struck me, this is the answer. Although I would have to get my husband's consent afterwards, sending an email should suffice. First, I pretended to apologize deeply to them, saying, "I'm sorry, my words were too harsh. As an apology, I'll provide some funds for you to go on a trip somewhere. How about that?" I was confident they would take the bait. As expected, their eyes lit up at the mention of a trip, and they agreed to my proposal, saying, "That's fine." Then, weakly, I told them, "During your trip, I'll also be leaving here." To my surprise, my sister-in-law exclaimed joyfully, "Really? You're leaving? Lucky. Now this will be our house." My mother-in-law seemed unfazed on the surface, but inside she must have been pleased. I arranged accommodations on the spot, and the next day, I was able to send them on a week-long spa trip. This marked the real beginning of our strategic battle. Afterwards, I quickly informed my husband of the situation in detail, and he fully supported the plan I had proposed. As I had declared previously, I packed the necessary belongings and left our home. The destination was my parents' house, 5 train stations away. Upon arrival, I explained everything in detail to my parents, who were initially shocked by the outrageous actions of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but soon understood the whole situation and warmly welcomed us. I had rented a storage unit to temporarily keep my belongings, where I quickly arranged for movers to transfer everything. Thus, the moving preparations took place smoothly, and by the day before their return, everything was ready. During that period, I had not been able to sleep well for a long time and felt very tired, but fortunately, the sense of security at my familiar parents' house finally allowed me to sleep comfortably. With adequate rest, I was ready to face the important showdown the next day. Mentally and physically prepared, I was ready to handle whatever came next. On the day of their return, my phone rang as expected. I heard my mother-in-law shouting, "What is this?" and I felt right to keep the phone away from my ear. "Welcome back. How was your trip?" I asked calmly, to which she panicked, shouting, "What are you calm about? We can't get into the house, it's covered, and strangers are destroying it." As I anticipated her reaction, I couldn't help but laugh inside. I then calmly responded, "Ah, those are the contractors I arranged." "Why are they destroying our house?" my sister-in-law screamed over the phone, following in her mother's footsteps. Calmly, I replied, "It is inevitable. As I told you before, we are leaving this place." They were visibly shaken by this fact. When they returned, the entire house was covered with sheets and demolition was underway, making it impossible for them to enter. In response, I explained, "I simply acted as you wished. I packed up and left the house, that's all." When my mother-in-law urgently said, "Do something. We can't get in," I calmly explained, "I'm sorry, but you can't enter. Demolition has already started. Perhaps I did not explain enough to you, but this house was once handed down to me by my father, and after we decided to leave. It was no longer needed. It was economically rational to demolish the old building and sell the land. Initially shaken, they seemed to regain their composure momentarily. Still, they soon expressed dissatisfaction again, saying, "That can't be possible." Unable to bear their complaints, I replied with a slight laugh, "No, it is possible. It's my house after all. My husband is already aware of all the plans. Originally, this large house was too big for just the two of us, and this is actually the result you wanted. Isn't it? I have no intention of returning, and rather, I am enjoying my vacation." They were at a loss for words for a while. Breaking the silence, I explained the situation in more detail. "To tell you the truth, your belongings have already been stored at your husband's place. He is quite angry about the fact, so it would be better for you to deal with it sooner." Upon hearing this new information, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law finally understood the severity of the situation and began to panic. Listening to their responses over the phone, I gently ended the conversation. Later, I heard that they received even harsher reprimands from my father-in-law. Eventually, having lost their home, they reluctantly spent the night at a nearby motel. When they sought help from my husband, his usual mild temper exploded, and as a result, he gave them an even stricter lecture. At the end of his lecture, he resolutely declared, "I will no longer have any dealings with the two of you, effectively cutting ties with them." Since that decision, my husband has completely avoided any contact with them and kept his distance. The subsequent situation for the two, namely my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, became very difficult. Suddenly without a place to live, they seemed at a loss, wandering aimlessly. For a long time, they moved from hostel to motel, but eventually, my mother-in-law started working as a cleaner in a motel. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law kept busy with various part-time jobs while searching for an apartment, and I heard from their father about her earnest efforts. However, for financial reasons, they could not find a stable residence soon and were forced to move from one relative or acquaintance's house to another. Initially, many people welcomed them, but due to their self-centered behavior, that welcome soon cooled, leading to frequent expulsions from their places of residence. My husband and I moved from our longtime home to a new residence closer to his workplace. The new rental property is very comfortable, and we are enjoying a pleasant life. On the site of the old house we demolished, plans are underway to build a new single-family home, and once it is completed, we plan to start a new chapter there. This will ultimately be our final place of residence,